Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today we'll be doing a mid lane champion improvement tier list. So this is going to be which champions I think are the best for improving at the game itself, improving your fundamentals, and ranking up over a long time. Now this is not a tier list on what's actually best to kind of get out of low elo, because it's not the same thing. I did do a tier list on which champs were best for climbing in low elo a few months ago, I think. I will pin it in a comment below, so if you guys want to go and see just, what's the best for climbing at a low elo, you can go and click that. But this will mainly be focused on the long term, what is actually best for improving, what's going to give you the really long term results as opposed to just like the short term climb. So first off, there are a couple different ways you can approach this. So when it comes to like what champs are actually good for improvement, I think there's two there's two schools of thought with it. So one is that some people say that the best champs to improve are to play champs that are very simple fundamentally. That way you can focus on learning the game itself so that you're not actually focused on learning the champ. So an example would be a champ like Annie, right? Like that's the one that people always talk about, where it's like Annie is a champ that because she allows you to just, essentially focus on playing the game instead of playing the champ because the champion is so simple, it like accelerates your improvement at the game. The other kind of school of thought is that champions like, for example, Orianna might be better for improving than Annie because these test more fundamentals, right? So there are some fundamentals that Annie doesn't test as well. Like CSing on Annie is very easy. And now you can kind of see that as a bonus, or I guess as a positive or a negative, because if it doesn't test your fundamentals at CSing that well, because CSing on Annie is so easy, you can kind of skip CSing as like something to learn. And while that does mean that you can just focus on learning your other fundamentals, it also means that you might find it more difficult to swap to other champions, because once you do swap to another champion, you're then going to have to learn how to CS with them. Whereas a champion like Orianna, I think it tests more fundamentals in a more balanced way. So I think depending on which one you value more will depend on when you rank them. And I'll talk about these champs in particular, when we get to them. That's kind of what I'm thinking, is that for me, we're mainly looking at, I guess, like, how good is this champion at teaching you the game, and how easily are you going to be able to transfer this champion's skills to other champions? So that's my criteria, and obviously everyone has a different opinion on this. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Something that I'll add really quick before we get started is that you have to remember that just because a champion is in S tier, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you learn what you want to learn. So for example, if Orianna is S tier, you're not really going to get better at champions like Yasuo and Yone by playing Orianna. Even if Orianna teaches you a bunch of game fundamentals, there's going to be a lot of other things missing. Like, you're not going to learn that much about melee versus range laning, for example, because it's just not something that you have to deal with on Orianna as a range champ. So keep that in mind, that these champions are somewhat weighted against their own classes. Like, obviously, even if, let's say Orianna is higher ranked than Akali, Akali might teach you assassins better than Orianna would. So I'll try and talk about that when we get to each champ, but there is, of course, some, I guess, differentiation of which champs transfer to which other champs. Without further ado, then let's get our tier list started. So our first one will be Ahri, and Ahri is a champ that I think is really, really good for climbing in low elo. I've said this in my tier list before, in my previous one, that she is just amazing for climbing. She's extremely forgiving, and it works well in basically every game, which is really nice. But I actually think that Ahri is not super good for improving. In my mind, she's either a B or a C. Might have to move her around at the end depending on, where the champs end up going, but the thing with Ahri is that she allows you to get away with a lot of very poor fundamentals. Like, she has sustain for laning phase, so you can get away with that. Eventually you get to the point where you can just wave clear. You've got a lot of mobility, you've got a lot of self-peel, so stuff like ganks and that, you're not going to get punished as hard for them, and you can very easily have sloppy fundamentals and get away with them on Ahri, which I think when we're trying to improve is probably not the way to go. I think also she is, I would say, not... She doesn't teach you that much about the laning phase in general. Like, I think laning phase is one of the most important things to learn. And I think Ahri, the way Ahri lanes it's very different from, I guess, what traditional laning is, because she's more of a neutralizer as opposed to an aggressive pick. So once again, I think Ahri is an amazing solo queue champion, but I don't think she's top tier when it comes to improving. Akali, I think, is probably the best assassin for learning fundamentals. Not sure about that. I mean, I have to see when I get to them, but Akali is, for a good reason, one of the only assassins that gets played in pro play, and that's because she's much less reliant on cheese and does reward the fundamentals. She's a champ that, can side lane well, will test your CSing and stuff like that. And she just has like a very standard laning phase, I guess, for an assassin. There's not really some gimmick or some cheese that you can pull off in order to get kills. I guess Akali's weakness when it comes to improvement and what's probably keeping her out of S tier is that she is quite difficult to play. And that means that you are going to have to invest quite a bit into learning the champion before you're actually like learning the game with her, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see where she goes in A tier. I think high skill champions like Akali in general, they can be a little less good, like I said, for improvement, because you can end up with so much of your skill coming just from the champion, and then you end up being an Akali one-trick and not being able to transfer it. But I do think of the assassins, she probably has the most transferable skills. Akshan? I think Akshan is pretty terrible when it comes to transferring skills to other champs. So I think Akshan is a very heavy cheese champ. He is reliant on getting random kills from other lanes. I don't think there are that many other champs mid lane that play out like Akshan's gameplay or like his game plan does. So overall, I'm not a huge fan of him. I also think that he gets away with a little bit. Like, he just has stronger trades for the most part than other people, so you don't have to think so much about like actually when you're trading and why and like the cooldowns you're punishing and that. So I think Akshan's pretty low on my list, and I'm tempted to even put him lower because he does sort of just fill a gimmick. This is, again, not to say that the champ is weak, but I really don't think he is that good for learning the game. And I think that if you're playing Akshan, you're most likely just learning Akshan rather than learning League of Legends. Anivia should be reasonably high on the tier list for me. I think she's somewhere in A tier, maybe on the lower end of A tier. I think there are a lot of fundamentals that are going to be tested with Anivia. I mean, she is an immobile mage, which means you need to think about things like ganks and warding and positioning and stuff like that. You know, playing around cooldowns. All that is going to be relevant as Anivia. I do think Anivia loses points for me, more because there's almost like a safety net in there. And I'm not even talking about the egg. What I mean is that if you ever watch a bad Anivia play, right? This is what, like, if you watch a low elo Anivia play, what will often happen is they get level 6 and then suddenly it's just like wave clear, right? And they're not actually using this priority for anything. They're just like clearing the wave and they're removing interaction. And so they're not being punished, but they're not doing anything with it either. You know, it's not like they're looking for roams. It's not like they're still trying to pressure their opponent under tower, you know, farming camps or doing something with that priority. And in other words, I guess it's like, you can get away with being sloppy in the laning phase as Anivia. That's not to say that Anivia can't teach you the laning phase, right? Like, I think if you watch a high-low Anivia, you know, someone who's like Diamond 199 LP or something, you're going to see that Anivia can put down a lot more pressure in the laning phase than someone that can't. So, I don't know. Anivia has the potential, I think, to teach you a lot about the game, but I think also you can become complacent. You can definitely become a bit relaxed and miss out on things that another champ would force you to learn. And so for me, I think she's going to be on the lower end of A tier. Annie is next, and to your guys' surprise, I'm actually not going to put Annie in S tier. So I think Annie should be high for sure. But for me, I do really value having all those fundamentals tested. So I definitely can't come out here and say that I don't think Annie is good for improving, because I think she is really good for improving. She will allow you to just focus pretty much completely on learning the game because the champ is so simple. But I do think that Annie won't teach you much about the laning phase. She's not going to teach you much about CSing or farming or like being really efficient on side lane. She's not going to teach you these things. She is going to teach you a bunch about, you know, team fighting and roaming, priority usage. So there's a bunch of good things about Annie, no doubt. But for me, she does not make it into the S tier. And I think also with kind of some of the skills that League of Legends, I guess there are more skills to League of Legends than there used to be, right? Like, if we go back to when I first started playing this game, I first started playing ranked at the end of Season 4, and I got to Master in Season 5. Back then, I think Annie would have been a perfect champ for improving, because straight up, like, I remember when I got to Master for the first time, I didn't even know about things like wave control. It just wasn't really a thing back then. So Annie, I think, has almost been like power crept out of the improvement S tier, just because nowadays the game is much more advanced and there are things that I think Annie will not teach and will not punish as hard as other champs do. Aurelion Sol is, I think, pretty low on the list. So A-Sol is another champ that kind of has a gimmick that I don't think really extends to other champs. So yeah, I don't know, he's just very different. He will teach you stuff about like neutralizing the laning phase and like staying farmed and stuff like that. But I think Ahri is better at those things. And I also think just with, you know, with A-Sol's like range and stuff, you can get away with a lot more on this champ, while also, I guess, losing the game in ways you might not realize, right? Like, you can just play for AFK scaling, but a good A-Sol will know how to pressure the lane in the right spots and stuff like that. But I don't think it's actually that easy to learn that with A-Sol. I think it would be easier to play a different champ and transfer those skills to A-Sol later. So, I don't know, A-Sol's in a weird spot. I think gimmick and niche champs generally, while they can be quite fun, like I love playing ASOL and they can be quite strong. Again, I think ASOL, especially in lower elo, is strong. I don't think he's a particularly good champ for learning mid lane. Azir. Azir is crazy broken right now. Really crazy broken, but I also don't think Azir is particularly good for learning the game. So I want to say he's like maybe slightly better than Ahri. So the reason would be that on Azir, it is going to test a lot for you. You're going to have to really learn about like team fighting, you know, when to engage, when to peel. There is a lot you can do in the laning phase, but I think Azir, he has an extremely overloaded kit, and there is a lot that you're going to kind of get out of jail free cards for, right? Like you have a really long dash, you have self peel, you have a lot of range. Even if you don't get ahead in the laning phase, even though he's very capable of it, you still just will scale. So yeah, I don't know. Even though Azir is kind of like, in a way, he's a traditional mage. I think he's just like a traditional mage. He is very difficult to play, but when you get good at him, he's quite forgiving. You know, I think LeBlanc is a champ like that too, where there is a lot that you have to invest into getting good at this champ. But once you do, it just feels like the champ has so much to it, so many extra things in their kit that other champs don't. And I think having that extra safety is a crutch, because it's not gonna force you to learn those things that ultimately you have to learn. Now I'm going to skip some of the off-meta mids, stuff like Brand, and that's mainly because I don't think the player base is high enough for them. And I think like you will get the gist of it anyway. So I'm just going to keep going with mainly meta mids. Cassio, I love Cassio. I will say that when I first started ranking up, I was pretty much a Cassiopeia 1 trick all the way up to Diamond 2. In Season 5, I played like 550 Cassio games. So she definitely has a special place in my heart, but I don't think she's that great for improving. I think that she plays very, very differently than other mages. I don't know. You will learn a lot of stuff, but it's like, I don't know. She does play very different from a lot of other champs, and I think she is sort of like ASOL, where she has a niche, which is like she's a short-range DPS mage. She has different wave control than a lot of other mages, right? Like you need to keep the wave close to tower. And also you can get away with some stuff on this champ that you can't on others, because you're inherently a lot tankier and you've got some nice self peels. So for example, like one thing I see a lot is in low elo, right? Cassios might get ganked and then they might just turn the gank 1v2. Whereas like, that's good if you play Cassio, no doubt about that, right? But when you go to swap to a different champ, or when you're trying to learn League, if suddenly you find that you can't 1v2 those ganks and you weren't actually like, you weren't tracking those ganks, you were unaware of them, then I don't think Cassio is going to be the best for learning it. So I'm not sure. I think I'd probably put her in as like a low B, maybe a high C. Again, like it's a great champion. I love Cassio so much. Probably my favorite champ of all time, or at least in the top 3. But for improvement, I think nowadays there are much better options you have. But I don't know. Remember, at the end of the day, like fun is a factor too. Corki. Corki is a fairly terrible champ for improvement. I think Corki is really fun. I mean, I love Corki, but I'd probably put him like here. So he's got a dash, which makes things easier. He's got a lot of range, so you can farm from really far. I guess he will teach you a lot of things. Like he's probably like higher than ASOL for me, because he is like a scaling champ, but he doesn't really have like a niche to him. He doesn't really have like some cheese. I guess like package, but I don't know. That's just kind of like using an important cooldown. I don't think that's particularly cheese in my mind anyway. So yeah, I'd probably put him about here. I guess my biggest downside for Corki is that he does not really have a way to pressure the lane. So he's not just a neutralizer in a way that a champ like Ahri is, but he is like actively I do not want to interact with my opponent before 6 in like any way, shape or form, right? I think that's a very bad way to learn the game, because you're gonna just miss out on so much stuff that you can do in the laning phase. Because sometimes, you know, when I play Corki, I notice like, oh, maybe I can actually do like a little trade on my opponent here, but it never really like turns into anything, right? And also you're not really punished for not doing it, even though it might mean that, let's say they're like a little bit lower on HP because you took a good trade, and that ends up you win a skirmish later on or something like that. So what I'm saying basically is that I think Corki, while he tests some fundamentals, and he tests them quite hard, like I think team fighting and farming are tested very aggressively on this champ. The problem is that you're going to miss a huge amount of the game, right? You don't really need to care about ganks because of your W. You can pretty much just not care about wave clear because the wave should always be on your side, and you don't really care about trading or harassment because Corki just doesn't need to do that. So yeah, I don't think he's like that great for improvement. What else we got? Ekko. I think I'll put Ekko on the list. So Ekko is, I would say he's not as bad as people think for improvement. I think that he is probably somewhere about here. I think he's very similar to Ahri in that he has a lot of get out of jail free cards, mainly with his R and his dash on E. Now he is a melee assassin, which means you get punished a little bit harder than Ahri. But the reason I have him a bit lower is because Ekko has like a lot less to learn with wave control, because basically Ekko's wave control and Ekko's lane phase is pretty much just like you don't AFK, but you're going to be on the back foot until you have enough points in Q that you can clear the wave. And then once you get that, your game plan changes to like Q the wave and move around the map, right? So I think he has a very stagnant, is stagnant the right word? Maybe just like a very basic game plan. And I don't think there are that many other champs that play like this anymore. Off the top of my head, Talon is the only thing that sort of plays like this, but Talon has much more like, yeah, many more windows to look for some sort of aggressive play, although Talon definitely has problems of his own, which we'll get to. So I'd probably put him somewhere in here. I'm tempted to put him a little lower. Yeah, I think I might come back to Ekko. For now, I'm going to leave him there. We'll reevaluate them all at the end. Fizz. Okay, so Fizz is somewhat similar to Ekko, but let's see. I think I'm going to shift some of these around. So I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to move Fizz into here. So the thing is, Fizz is a relatively easy to pick up assassin, but I think Fizz definitely has one of the more cheesy playstyles. Like pretty much the way Fizz works is, you know, you hit level 3 and then you look for trades pretty much regardless of whether your opponent has cooldowns or not. And at level 6, if you hit an ult max range, you can almost always get a kill. You can also really easily set up ganks with just Q ult. And I think that he also is a lot easier to farm on than some other assassins, right? Like, there's not much you have to do with prepping the wave on Fizz. You can pretty much just E it once you have lots of points in it, and it'll one-shot the wave. And also just with his mobility and safety, as well as being able to do some really funky builds, like you can do Zhonya's first, there's a lot of stuff that you get away with on Fizz that you won't on other champs. So I would say, like, yeah, when I'm thinking of like a champ like Akali, I just feel like this will test like actual League of Legends fundamentals much harder than Fizz. And that being said, though, like if you're a really good Fizz, you'll get a lot out of it, right? This is not to say that you won't improve with Fizz. It's more to say that like if you invest a lot of games with Fizz, you are going to be really good at Fizz. But if you're good at Akali, I think there's a good chance you're good at Fizz. If you're good at Fizz, I don't think you're necessarily good at Akali. That's what I'm trying to say. Galio. So Galio is probably one of the best roaming mids. Yeah, one of the best mids for learning roaming. I think he's probably going to be about here. So Galio, he's not quite like... He doesn't have enough wave clear that you can just push the wave and just ignore anything else. You do actually still have to play like a reasonably intelligent, like melee versus range matchup. Also, he has like a global ultimate, but it's not up so much that you can always rely on it, right? Like it has a reasonably long cooldown, even though the cooldown just got nerfed. And there's lots of kind of things you can do on Galio. You can look for flanks. You can still side lane pretty well on this champ. You don't have to just like stay grouped. You can still lane reasonably well, right? Like if your opponent wasted cooldown, sometimes you can hit them with an E. So I think Galio is, in my mind, one of the best roaming mids for learning about roaming. Now, does it extend that well to learning an assassin? No, I don't think so. And will he teach you how to play a mage? Again, I don't really feel that way. But Galio for learning roaming and for learning like basic melee versus range, for being like a tankier champ, maybe getting towards the realm of bruises, I think Galio is actually really, really good for that. Where we go next? Gonna do some scrolling here. So Irelia is really pretty bad for learning, I would say. I'd probably put her like here. So the thing with Irelia is that she will test your laning phase a lot, right? Like if you want to be really good at Irelia, you need to get a lot out of the laning phase. But this champ is extremely difficult. I would say possibly one of the most difficult mid laners in the game. And so I think if you are investing a lot into learning Irelia, you'll probably be good at Irelia, and you probably will be good at other bruisers, but there aren't that many bruiser mids. Now, if you're really trying to learn something like, let's say you really want to play like Yone, Yasuo, Irelia, and Camille, then you might find that Irelia is actually really good for learning. But I think for most other mid laners, the skills aren't that transferable, and there's also some stuff that you will get away with on Irelia. So I notice a lot with bad Aurelias, right? They almost use their sustain as a crutch as opposed to like something aggressive. So what they'll do is they'll take a bad trade, or rather, they won't take the bad trade. They will take damage that they shouldn't, and then they'll heal it back up. Whereas like good Aurelias will aggressively trade, knowing that they can lose HP, and then heal it back up, right? And I think that while that is something you can learn with Irelia, I think you might even find it easier to learn the laning fundamentals on a different champ, and then kind of, you know, you would find it a bit easier to then do them on Aurelia. At least that's kind of my opinion on it. Again, though, like, if you invest a lot of time in the champ, you'll get really good. I just think you're going to end up being very specialized. Like, it's actually very rare that people have Aurelia in their champion pool. It's very common that people are just Aurelia one-tricks, so, you know, Aurelia mains, but then they don't really play anything else. And I think that's for good reason, because the champion skill does not translate that well to other champs and to other classes. Jayce. Jayce is kind of weird. I think I'd put Jayce as like a high B, or actually, no, I think I'll put him in the A tier. So the good thing with Jayce is that he has the ability to harass the lane, but also like has a fairly strong scaling playstyle too. He can side lane, he can take camps, he can farm, he's immobile while also having some self peel. So he has some tools in his kit that are going to allow him, you know, to get away with stuff. Like, for example, a truly immobile champ won't have the option to say go phase rush and knock people away with your E. Whereas Jayce does have that, so there's some stuff you can get away with on Jayce that you can't on others. But I think overall, like, Jayce is a really good champ for improving. He can be too difficult. That's maybe my biggest downside of Jayce, is that while he is testing those, it's like you could probably test the same fundamentals with an easier champ, because, you know, again, Jayce has a lot of complexity in his kit already, so you're going to have to invest time into learning that champ before you kind of learn everything else. But if you're willing to put in the time, then I think Jayce is, yeah, I think he's really good for learning how to play League. What else have we got? So I'm going to put Karma on this list more as a discussion about kind of like supportive mids in general. So I think a champ like Karma, the thing is, okay, here's the thing. Like, as a Karma mid, there's a lot you can do. She has the potential for a lot of different things, right? Like, you can play very aggressive on this champ. You can play very passive. You can look to push and roam, or you can look to just like play for your lane. You can play to support your jungler, or you can play to roam bot. There's a lot of options on this champ, which you would think puts it higher, especially because she is a champ that is... She's like relatively simple to pick up, but she also has a high skill cap, right? So you're definitely rewarded for putting time into her. My biggest problem with a champ like Karma, and again, I noticed this when I verse bad Karmas, is that they have clearly learned the champ. They've learned this champ first, rather than learning something else. So rather than playing aggressively, rather than like looking for RQs when they have the opportunity, all they end up doing is they just like AFK the laning phase, and then they come to team fights and they press like Alt E and shield their team, right? And that is like, you're doing so much less than Karma is capable of. So for me, I think if you're starting by learning Karma, she would actually be very low on my list, because there is so much that you can be forgiven for, so many fundamentals that you can get away with, just because the champ still offers a lot in team fights. But in terms of potential, like potential learning, if you really like invested everything into learning Karma and like got really good at her, she would be in A tier for me. So I don't know. It's a hard champ to choose where to balance. I should probably put it in C tier overall. But do you kind of see what I'm saying? I don't know. You guys have to comment about this, because I'm not too sure if I'm making myself clear. It's just like I see it so much, like even high elo Karmas, where they've just like, clearly they've picked Karma because it's like, you know, they just want an easy mid that they can neutralize on, but you can do so much more on this champ. I feel like Karma players really don't live up to anywhere near what the champ can do. Kassadin. So Kassadin is interesting. I think Kassadin is, it should be relatively low. I would probably put him right about here. So the reason I think Kassadin is pretty low is because there are a lot of things that are kind of like binary for Kassadin. Like, it's either you can do something in lane or you can't, or it's like, you know, your game plan might be as simple as just like AFK scaling and try get more CS, try, you know, wait for level 6, level 11, 2 items, you know, whatever you're playing for. I do think that if you're going to play a lot of these other kind of super scalers, like if you played a champ like Kale or Kassadin, you know, those champs kind of do transfer to each other. But overall, like, Kassadin is a lot less agency than even some of the other kind of like soft scaling champs. Like, you think of a champ like Akali, right? Like, Akali's pre-6 plays out pretty similarly to Kassadin, but post-6 plays out really differently. And also, like, even then, like, pre-6 Akali does play out fairly differently to Kassadin. There's still the potential to get aggressive and stuff like that. So, I don't know, Kassadin could teach you a lot about how to defensive lane and how to scale and how to neutralize. But again, I think there are much better champs at doing this. And overall, I would have him pretty low on my list, especially because he is pretty much a counter-pick champion, at least in my opinion. Katarina. So Kat also wouldn't be... Kat is almost an exact copy of Fizz for me. I think she is a champ that, like, I guess she's harder than Fizz, so that will probably put her lower on my list a little bit, just because, again, you can be quite good at cat and quite bad at the game and still get quite high rank, which is maybe telling that it's not that great for learning the fundamentals. You'll still learn quite a bit about, like, punishing cooldowns, you know, finding kills, roaming at good times and stuff like that. But again, so many Katarinas will just run around the map and get kills. They won't do it with any rhyme or reason behind it. And that is honestly partially what the champ is good at. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't think of I don't think of Katarina as a great champ for learning, and I think there are much better assassins for learning first. Now, Cat is a great champ for climbing, especially if you're good at her. But yeah, for learning, not so. What do we got? We'll skip these. LeBlanc. So LeBlanc is also, in my opinion, not that good for learning. So the thing is, LeBlanc will test you harder than a champion like Ahri does. You need to get more done, and it's harder to CS. You need to be able to like set up ganks. You need to snowball the game. There are things that are going to be much more difficult on LeBlanc. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of want to put her in A because I think she is a good champ for kind of learning the halfway point between mages and assassins, right? Like if you're a mage player trying to transition to learning assassins, LeBlanc is a good kind of like good in between those two. But I think that the problem is that if you do get really good at LeBlanc as a champ, she does have so many safety tools, right? You have so many dashes, you have a chain, you have clone. It's very hard to die in this champ, even if you make a lot of mistakes. I think it's also very easy to feel like you're doing stuff on LeBlanc when you're not actually doing stuff. So an example would be if you like WQRE someone, right? You might chunk them out. And it can still be good chunk for sure, but if you do it on the wrong target, like that can be really punishing. And so like that's good for learning from. But I think that it's less committal than other champs are. So if you think of like, if you're playing a champ like Zed, right, and you go in, you use all your combo on the wrong target, that's it. You're done. And you're going to feel that. You're going to feel that you're just useless in the team fight now. Whereas like LeBlanc still offers something. So she is like more forgiving, I guess, in terms of her conceptual side of things. I still think she's like a very hard champ to play, but I do think like conceptually she doesn't punish you as an assassin as much, and that's partially because she's halfway between a mage and assassin, right? So she's kind of in a weird spot. Overall, I really like LeBlanc, but in my mind, I don't think she can be higher up, especially when, remember that we're comparing these champs kind of within their tiers. So it's like, you know, if we're kind of learning like a mage assassin-esque champ, like, do I think she really deserves to be that much higher? No, but if I were comparing her to, say, Akali, like, I think LeBlanc might be better for improving than Akali overall. But Akali is a much better champ for learning other assassins than LeBlanc is. Do you kind of see what I mean? Like, just within their classes, I think Akali is higher than LeBlanc is within hers, but that's also partially because there are so many good mages for learning the game, whereas there are so few assassins, in my mind, for learning the game. What do we got next then? So, Lissandra. Lissandra should not be too high on the list. I think Lissandra probably goes somewhere about here. And Lissandra suffers from a lot of the same problems Karma does, where it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, okay, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to Q waves, I'm just going to roam, I'm going to play for 2v2, I'm just going to ult, you know, the main target, and that just misses so much of what the champ can do. If you're good at Lissandra, you can actually pressure the lane like really hard. You can, you know, you have the option to push and move, or you have the option to pressure the tower, right? It's a champ that can side lane well, she can flank, she can do lots of things, so that's great. But there's also so much you can get away with, right? Like, even if you're a bad Lissandra, it's quite hard to punish you. You can just like ult for self-sustain. You do have a lot of wave clear. And I very often, this is one of those champs where like, if I see a Lissandra on the enemy team, I can really tell if they've just learned the game through Lissandra, right? Like, there are some Lissandras who will literally just like not touch you in lane. They will just Q the wave and AFK, and sometimes they win doing that, sometimes they won't. But the key being is that they're not even realizing, I guess, what they're doing wrong. And I think that it's much easier to go from a champ, you know, that can pressure the lane and then come back to Lissandra and then realize like, oh, I can pressure the lane and I can do all this other stuff. So for actually learning like engage and stuff like that, Lissandra's a really good tool for that. In fact, you know, I'm tempted to put her a little higher. Yeah, I'll probably put her like here. Like, she is pretty solid overall. But yeah, like, she has some things that hold her back. Next up, we have Lux, and oh boy, have I been waiting for this one. So, you would look at Lux and think that actually she should be pretty high on the list because she isn't a mobile mage. She has the ability to pressure the lane phase, stuff like positioning matters, cooldowns, of course. Like, there are a lot of very, very good things about Lux, but Lux suffers from one massive downside, or two massive, I guess, ones, is that she has just bullshit get out of jail free card with her ult. Like, she can just ult every other wave and not have to lane at all. so cringe, man. It's disgusting. The thing is, if you're really good at laning on Lux, the champ's actually really strong. But you can also be really terrible at laning and just AFK, and it's fine. And you still scale fairly well. It's not a champ that, like, you have the potential to win lane, and you have to win lane. Like, no, you don't have to win lane on this champ. You can just AFK and scale. So I think because she gets so much forgiveness and so many get out of jail free cards, and she has so much range, so much safety, she can't be as high as other mages on the list. But I do think there are some actual good things. Like, I do think laning phase on Lux, it can be tested pretty hard. So there is a potential for learning a lot with Lux, but I don't know if it's personal bias. Personally, I think that you're much better off learning a different mage, and then you'll find picking up Lux to be so easy. I think starting with Lux, you might find transitioning to other champs more difficult. Where would I put it, though? I think, honestly, similar to Karma. Like, is a champ that has a lot of potential and is really just held back by how much safety is within the kit. Next, then, is Malzahar. So, for me, Malzahar, he is similar to Annie in some ways. He is a relatively simple champ and will teach you, he will allow you to learn a lot of fundamentals of the game. But I think the thing with Malzahar is that you can also, it's not actually that you can get away with more things. Because if you play Malzahar in high elo, you actually find that you need to be really good at defensive laning on this champion. Like, a lot of people in low elo will just pick Malzahar and you can AFK wave clear because people don't know how to punish your cooldowns, they don't kill your voidlings, they don't know how to, you know, zone you off the wave and stuff like that. My thing is, you get higher elo, you actually get tested harder and harder on Malzahar. Like, if you play Malz in, like, D1 or something, you're going to find, like, you're really going to be forced to learn a lot of things, or you're going to start losing a lot. But the thing is, if you're playing Malz in low elo, I don't think you'll be tested for these things at all. And so all you're really getting is, like, a simple-to-play champion, like Annie, but you also don't get a lot of the good things that come with that, right? Like, there is no... You don't really get to learn about the laning phase on Malzahar, which you kind of do on Annie. You don't really get to learn about roaming on Malz, which you, again, do on Annie. Because there's just, like, less proactivity and more reactivity with Malzahar. So I'd probably put him in D tier for that reason. Like, I think, yeah, the best thing he has going for him is he's a simple champ. But I really think there are better simple champs. And again, I'm, like, comparing things to the other options. Like, I think that, I don't know, again, it depends what avenue you approach it from, right? Like, if you just want to learn about the game, then obviously a simple champion like Malz is better than a simple champion, or sorry, than a difficult champion like Akali. But what I'm thinking is that, like, this is, if you play Malz, it's not going to teach you how to play any other champ, and it's going to teach you pretty shallow tools, you know? Like, if you're good at Malz, I don't think you necessarily get good at these things. The only argument is if you play Malz and you consciously are like, okay, I'm just not learning the champ, I'm just going to focus on learning League of Legends. In that case, he could be higher, but I think it's very difficult to split the two, at least consciously. I think it's quite hard to split the two. Where are we even at now? I think we did, so we did Malz, we're probably coming along here. Neeko, I think Neeko is actually pretty good for learning. So where would I put her? Here, maybe a bit higher. Yeah, I think I'd put her about here. So Neeko will teach you a lot about team fighting. She'll teach you a lot about laning. You have to pressure really hard. I think that she is one of those champs that, like, you know, can pressure lane and also is somewhat required to pressure lane. Like, I think Neeko, if she falls behind, is relatively useless, but, like, when she's ahead is really, really strong. And I say relatively useless, like, she still has utility from behind, but it's just Neeko when ahead is such a different beast, right? So I think Neeko is one of those better pressuring laning mages, and she, again, is sort of like LeBlanc, where she's, like, halfway between being, like, a mage and something else. You know, I guess, like, the difference would be, you know, a traditional mage, like something like a Syndra or an Ori, would be, like, really hard on one end of the side of things, and then the other end would be, like, engaged champs like Lissandra, and then you find champs like Neeko, Ahri, and LeBlanc kind of, like, fall somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I actually think Neeko is really good for improving. I guess the downside is that she is quite a difficult champ, which, again, good and bad. It means that you're going to be punished really hard. Fundamentally, it also means that you might find you need more games on her before you can really start, you know, getting better at the game. What have we got here then? So I think next is actually Orianna, right? So Orianna is going to be my first S tier, and she might even be my only S tier. We'll see how it goes. So the reason I think Orianna is the best champ, at least off the top of my head, in the game for improving at mid, is because she will test every fundamental while also not being an insanely difficult champ. Like don't get me wrong, Orianna has an incredibly high skill cap, but it's a reasonably easy champ to pick up. Like, I don't think it has super advanced combos. It's at least, like, sort of easy to understand. It's not like something where, like Azir, right, where there's, like, a big investment period before you really get some payoff. Like, you will just gradually get better prefer Orianna. So I think Orianna, you know, it will test literally everything, right? It's an immobile mage, doesn't have self-peel. It does have a move speed, which is nice. It has the potential to engage, to disengage, to play for peel. It can split push. It can farm camps. You know, ability to pressure the lane, to neutralize. It will teach you everything about the game that has to do with a ranged champion. Obviously, there's only so much you can learn about, like, you know, are you going to learn that melee versus ranged champion as an Orianna? No, I don't really think so, but for me, Orianna is just the best champ for improving at this game. Off the top of my head, like, I don't think of anything that comes that close to it. So I think it probably will be my only S tier, but we might add a couple others later if we end up moving around. So yeah, take my word for it. I think Orianna, amazing champ for learning. Next, I guess we'll put Pantheon. So Pantheon, I think, is actually pretty good. So the thing with Pantheon is that Pantheon is another one of those champs that works very well if you're trying to get into kind of the melee and bruiser space and you don't want something that's too difficult to pick up at first. So Pantheon is pretty simple to play, but he actually has a lot of nuance to him. Like while the combos aren't too difficult, there is, you know, like knowing how to use your priority and knowing if you should push or freeze the wave, because Pantheon can freeze and set up ganks, or he can push and roam, right? He's got a global on him. He can side lane as well. So there's actually like quite a lot of skills that will be tested on Pantheon. And there's also not that much that are kind of like, you know, there's no real get out of jail free card. Like even your E, you have to use intelligently. If you commit forward with W, you have to be prepared to take damage on the way out. So Pantheon, I mean, I might surprise you guys. I actually think he's like a really, really good champ for learning, especially if you end up wanting to learn other melees. Like if you're trying to get into a difficult melee like Irelia, you might find that starting with something like Pantheon just to kind of learn the melee versus ranged and kind of like what we do with Prio and stuff like that, you might find this is a good stepping stone to get you towards some of these more difficult champs, which is exactly what you want. Where are we then? I'm pretty much completely lost. So we did that one. We did Pantheon. Qiyana. Okay, so Qiyana is, in my opinion, not very high. So the reason I would say Qiyana is pretty low is because she is a very unique assassin. And also she has like a very, it's like unique. The champ itself is difficult and it's like sort of cheesy. Like she is a champion like Katarina that will just like get random kills and get fed off that. I suppose she should maybe be a bit higher than Katarina because you do have the potential to farm and stuff like that. But I think that you would find that, I don't know, if you're a Qiyana one trick, I generally don't think you can play other champions. But if you play other assassins, you might eventually find yourself gravitating towards Qiyana. So, I don't know. I respect Qiyana a lot as a champ. Like, I think especially when she came out, it's kind of sad to me that she has become more of just like a... She's become so weak in lane that now your main goal is to just like find random skirmishes, because I think that cheapens the game a lot, but that is maybe just like my approach to the game. So I would prefer a different assassin against something like Akali for learning over a Qiyana, but there is something to it, I guess. Yeah, for testing other assassins, there is something to it. Then let's see. So we did Qiyana, Quen. Sorry, I'm getting very lost here. Okay, so next I'll probably skip Rumble. I think he's more of a top laner at the moment, but I will put Ryze on the list. So Ryze is going to be a very controversial one. And again, this depends a lot on which school of thought you're applying to this. So if we look at it from the point of view that Ryze is a champion that will test like a lot of fundamentals, then he's actually very good. Like I would say potentially Ryze is an S tier, right? And so the reason for that would be that he has potential to pressure lane. He has a lot to do with prior usage. He's very short range, so you'll get punished very hard for misplaying in team fights. There's a lot of, again, like setup you can do with your jungler and stuff like that. The problem is, though, that Ryze is an incredibly difficult champ to play. I mean, Ryze is basically like the cock and balls torture of League of Legends. Like, this is a fucking hard champ to play. It really, really hard. Like, especially because of how short range he is now. And, like, he doesn't have the shield that he did before. So, like, if you're playing Ryze, the problem is that while he will test all those fundamentals, I really don't think a player below, like, Master Tier, and maybe even below, like, Grandmaster, is going to be good enough at Ryze to really focus on the rest of the fundamentals. So, if you think you're an insanely good Ryze, then he is a good champ for learning the rest of the game because he will test so many other areas. But I think that this champ is way too hard. And I would probably instead put him somewhere about here. Like, I don't think he's as hard as champ, or like he is hard in different ways. Yeah, like he's harder in some ways than Azir and Cassiopeia, but he will like test more things in them. So I don't know. Again, it really depends like how you're looking at it. For me though, it wouldn't be like if someone asked me like what champ would I recommend to improving, I don't think I'd ever recommend them Ryze. But again, it's because the champ is so difficult, not because it doesn't have the ability to teach you things. So, I mean, make of that what you will. Seraphine is a mid laner somewhat. I would say it's like very similar to Lux though, in that while there is a lot you can do aggressively with this champ, the problem is that most people just end up AFKing on it. In fact, I'm pretty tempted to put it down here. Like, it's real easy to just like Q waves on Seraphine, just play for like W in team fights. I really don't think that much more needs to be said about it. It's kind of like Karma, but it doesn't have the upside to it. There is much less you can do with Seraphine in terms of like pushing and moving and supporting your team and just, I don't know, being proactive compared to a champ like Karma. So for me, Seraphine's pretty low. Swain is kind of interesting. Swain is like, there aren't really many other mids that play like Swain these days. I would say Swain is, I mean, he's relatively simple, which is good. So you can definitely like learn fundamentals with Swain. But the problem is, like, if I'm thinking, you know, if you spend like 100 games learning Swain, you're just like learning general stuff, like what other champ really plays like Swain? I mean, like melee, some melee bruiser like Galio, but then the problem is this is like a range champ rather than a melee, so that causes the lanes to be played quite difficult or quite differently. I think there is like a lot that Swain loses. Like, there's a lot of teamfight nuance that other champs have that Swain doesn't. You know, as Swain, you can pretty much put yourself in as many people as possible, and obviously there's optimization around like, you know, the timing and stuff, but for the most part it's very clear cut. And I also think laning phase, while there is stuff you can do in lane with Swain, it's like you can't be super aggressive, right? It's not a champ that can continually punish on every cooldown. You have long cooldowns of your own. It might teach you a little bit about like how to play your own cooldowns, but yeah, for me, I wouldn't say it would be very high on the list. Okay, Sylas. So Sylas is also one of the best melees for learning, I think. So I would put Sylas close to Akali up here. And the reason is that while Sylas, he's not quite as cheesy as some of the other assassins, and he will actually teach you a lot about like fundamentals of melee versus range laning. So Sylas will, obviously he'll teach you a lot about all the different ults in the game. The way you teamfight on Sylas is very similar to other bruisers and assassins. The lane phase, you know, you've got some gank setup that you can play with. You can get aggressive. You also have like different max orders, like if you do want to play for Q max versus W max. The only thing that would maybe bring Sylas down is I do think his difficulty is quite high. But the thing is, again, within the Assassins tier and the Bruisers tier, remember, I'm comparing these classes to each other, or like within the class. I don't think there are many champions that you're going to find that are like significantly easier than Sylas. Like, just naturally, I think the Assassin Bruiser-esque tier is a pretty difficult class. So while Sylas is like maybe not as good overall at learning the game compared to a champion, you know, like Ahri or something, it's just within that assassin and melee tier, I think Akali and Sylas are some of the best for learning that and for really testing you on it. So I like Sylas a lot. I might dock him a few points just because it feels like you can cheese some kills a bit easier on this champ. Like, there's some Sylases that fall really far behind in lane and then find some random kills. So I might put him at this end instead. I still think Akali is better, but I think there is a good argument for Sylas being a really good melee for learning other melees in future. You know, like if your progression looks something like you started with Pantheon, and then you learned like Sylas and Akali, and then later on you went to something really hard like Irelia, I think that would be really cool. Our next one here is Syndra. So I'm pretty tempted to put Syndra in the S tier. So the things that Syndra have going for her is, again, she's like the skill shot, a mobile mage that can be punished, so you've got to think about things like ganks, you've got to think about pressuring the lane, your cooldowns, and while she does have a little bit of self-peel, it's on a pretty long cooldown, you know, 17 seconds on your E, and importantly, it can be used aggressively as well, so sometimes you have to make some tough decisions around that, which can be punished. So overall, I think Syndra is like really good for learning the game. I do think that she is slightly more forgiving than Orianna, again, because of that self-peel, because she has, like, I'd say slightly more range, and also just because there are some, like, easier combos in a way. Like, okay, Syndra combos are actually pretty hard. Like, overall, Syndra's combos are harder than Orianna's, but you can also get, like, 90% of the way there if you do something like, if you use the ult and then E combo in teamfights, right, where you just, like, ult to put all your balls on the ground and then you stun off of it. And I guess, like, yeah, I don't know. There is more difficulty, I think, to Syndra as a champ overall, which makes me want to put her lower than Ori as well, because I think it's like, Ori will still test all the fundamentals that Syndra does, but I think that Ori will do it while also being slightly easier to play, although admittedly, like, they're both not super easy, right? and the skill cap of both is insane. I think for now, I'm going to move her to very high A tier, but depending on if I move things around later, I could maybe put her in S. I think there is a pretty strong argument for it. Like, I think both Syndra and Orianna are like really, really good champs for learning the mage class. Definitely the two best, I think, off the top of my head, but it does kind of feel like Orianna is just on another level compared to Syndra. So let's see, we did Syndra, which was here. Okay, Taliyah. So Taliyah is kind of weird. I'm actually not too sure where I want to put Taliyah. Let me think about it. So like, okay, one of the biggest downsides for Taliyah, I think, is that she doesn't have as much of a lane phase as other champs do. So like, while you can pressure the lane against melee champs as Taliyah, if you ever play against a ranged champ, for the most part, you're just going to be like playing neutral, you're playing defensively. You can't really punish cooldowns very well on this champ. You know, it's not a champ that can like suddenly move forward and look for an aggressive trade. She is a mobile though, and she will teach you a lot about team fighting. You can do a lot with, you know, your ult position. I guess there's like stuff you can learn about priority usage. I feel like she should be reasonably high. I think she probably fits, honestly, just like smack bang in the middle. Like, I think she's overall just like a fine pick for learning. I don't think she's particularly great. I don't think she's particularly bad. She's just like a very average champ for learning the game, I think. We did Taliyah. Tristana, is that our next one? Yeah, I guess I'll put Tristan, given that she's a mid laner. So Tristana is pretty good, I think, for learning AD carries mid. So the thing is, if you ever want to play something like Lucian mid, or you want to play Akshan or something, Tristana is a good way to learn that, because like she does have some, you know, like she'll teach you a lot about playing AD carry while also being like a bit easier to pick up. That being said, she maybe has too many, you know, get out of jail free cards. Like I think the W, a lot of Tristanas that are bad at the game will just hold W forever, and so they'll miss out on a lot of aggression because they're always trying to hold it to get away, basically, right? I also think that Tristana, she has like a very, again, binary playstyle of like most of the time she just auto wins her lane, so you don't really need to think about some of the nuance to it of like which cooldowns to punish and like times you win and times you don't. So overall, I think AD carries mid are honestly not that good for learning mid lane. But of the AD carries mid, Tristana is probably one of the better ones. I think I'm probably going to put her about here. Like, I don't know. For me, it's still missing quite a lot. Maybe I should put her higher because, like, within her class, she is one of the best. But the problem is I feel like the class as a whole really sucks for learning mid lane. Like, I don't really recommend learning ADC mids for learning the rest of mid lane because they don't really play out the same. Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate should be very high on our list. I think TF is... He's pretty much just the ranged equivalent of Galio, but he's also like more difficult as a champ. So I'm maybe going to put him like slightly lower. So TF will teach you like a bunch of macro concepts. It'll teach you a lot about how to neutralize lanes and stuff like that. I guess my biggest downside to TF is that I feel like he won't teach you much about aggressive laning, which, I mean, again, if you don't want to play aggressive laners, it's fine. Like if your champ pool was like, what was this? TF, Galio, Ryze, and Taliyah. Like TF would be the perfect champ for learning about these champs. But like if you say wanted to convert from something like Twisted Fate and then you wanted to go play Syndra, like nah, it's not gonna happen. Champs are too different. So Twisted Fate overall, I think he is pretty good. He is similar to Ahri, but he gets like bonus points because he will be punished for immobility, which is good when you're trying to learn. You really want to get punished for these mistakes that you're making. But I think lacking aggression in the laning phase against other range champs can be an issue. You definitely can punish melee champs though, which is cool. And some of the weaker range you definitely can punish. And again, this is like, you know, I was talking about Annie before where she's been like power crept a little bit. I think TF is the same because if you think back in the day, like there used to be the overall like champs that are strong in lane, there used to be a lot less of them. You know, like back in the day, the champs that TF would struggle with would be like Ori, Syndra, Victor, and that would basically be it. But nowadays it's like, you know, what else have you got to contend with? Well, we've got like Sylas can punish you, although Sylas is not too bad. Like Neeko is really strong in lane. Like Azir is so strong in lane these days. You've got champs like Irelia, Tristana, you know, there's just like so much stuff that before TF would like have a few hard matchups and everything else was fine. Whereas now there's like a billion bad TF matchups, at least in my mind. I mean, I'm not a TF main, I'll say that, but I always feel like if I'm picking into TF, like if they blind, it's a free win. That's what I think anyway. We're getting pretty close to the end here. So let's see, we did the T. Tryndamere, I probably won't put on here. Oh, I guess I'll put him on because otherwise you guys will complain. So Tryndamere, I think he's simple, which is good, but Tryndamere's playstyle is really strange, and I don't think there are that many other champs it would translate to. Like, he is just a straight auto attacker. he's not like spell based at all, you know, in the way that like a champ like Aurelia or Yone might be. So for me, he's like pretty low on the list. I think that Tryndamere mains are, well, I don't know. Again, it could teach you a lot about like split pushing and stuff like that, but how many mids play like a straight hull breaker playstyle these days? Like almost none of them. So for that reason, I think he's like really low on the list. But I don't know. If you had a champ pool that like rewarded playing like melee auto attackers that split push, like let's say you wanted to play like, I don't know, Trynd, Jax, and like Camille Fiora mid, then I could maybe see Trynd being the gateway into that. But I just can't see a mid laner like starting with Trynd. Again, it's not to say he's weak because he's a good champ, but I think for improving, there's just so much that's going to be missing there that you're not going to learn through Trynd. We'll go, see, we're in this one. So we've got Veigar. Are these? Yeah, okay. So Veigar is, where would I put Veigar for improving? So, I'm actually not sure. So downside of Veigar, doesn't have that aggressive a laning phase, mostly has to focus on like the farming and neutralizing side of things. He is a mobile, but he has a lot of safety. He can go pretty tanky. I don't think he should be too high on the list. Like, I don't think Veigar will teach you that much about playing other mages. Like, Veigar seems like very similar to Asol in a way for me. Should he be that low though? No, I don't think so. I think we can maybe put Veigar somewhere like here maybe, where it will allow you to learn a lot of the other fundamentals of the game. Like if you're like, again, if you're looking at this and being like, okay, I really just want to focus on getting good at League of Legends and I'm not too fussed about which champ I play, then Veigar is pretty good for that. But is Veigar like gonna help you learn other champs? In my mind, like pretty much no. Like I don't think much of what Veigar does will translate to other champs. Vel'Koz is pretty hard, also pretty unique, which I think, again, points lost for that. I would probably put him pretty low. I will, no, he should be a bit higher than that. I think somewhere like here. So the thing is, he's like almost similar to Irelia, where he's like within his class, he's a very difficult champ to play. And while he will test a lot of fundamentals, it's like there are easier things to play. And he's also like somewhat unique, right? So like in the same way that Irelia is like one of the harder bruisers, Vel'Koz is a very difficult mage that doesn't really get the payoff. And there's nothing that Vel'Koz will teach you that like an easier champ, like say Orianna, although again, Ori's like not easy, but she's much easier than Vel'Koz, I think, won't teach you, right? So I think within his class, Vel'Koz doesn't really have a niche. I don't think there's anything that is like Vel'Koz specific for learning. So yeah, for me, it'd be like relatively low. Vex is really good for learning. I think Vex is a really, really solid learning champ. Like I'd actually have this really high. So I'd put Vex probably about, where would I put Vex? Maybe here. Thinking about it. Yeah, I think somewhere like here. So Vex is a really good champ for learning because she has the ability to punish the laning phase. She has like a relatively simple kit, so you can focus on learning the fundamentals in the same way that you can to Annie. She also has like a lot of different matchups that can play differently. She will give you elements of roaming. She can teach you how to like prep waves for CS. I guess like a weakness is that she's not very good at side laning, but you can learn that with, you know, like Ori or something instead. Like none of these champs really are that good at side laning. So again, no champ will teach you anything, but I think Vex is like one of the perfect combinations of being both relatively simple to play while also acting again as like a bridge between champs. Like if you remember before where I was saying like LeBlanc is kind of partway between, like let's say you main Orianna and you really want to learn a champ like, let's say you want to learn a champ like Sylas or maybe Lissandra. Like your progression might be like, okay, you start with Ori, then you move to Vex, then we move to maybe something like LeBlanc, then we move to like Sylas, and maybe then we go to like, I don't know, Ekko or Lissandra or Akali or something. You know, kind of how that progression of like we're going from like full traditional control mage, we're slowly moving down to like, you know, some like burst / engage mage to like burst assassin to now maybe we're trying some melees. Maybe we try like a facilitator or something. That would kind of be like my progression. And you can go the reverse as well. Like you could start from the other end. But Vex is like a really good champ as like a bridge between a lot of different styles. And that's really good because if you invest a lot of time into Vex, you probably find it pretty easy to branch out to a lot of different champs. We did Vex. Victor. Okay, so Victor is, I think Victor used to be a lot higher. So in the past, I would probably have Victor as like an S. And the reason is that he would be very similar to Ori in terms of like, you know, he has a lot of things that need to be punished. He had some form of self-peel he can play around. Overall, he's just like a team fighting mage and stuff like that. I think actually a downside of Victor is that he tends to win lanes pretty much for free. So there are very, very few champs that can fight back against Victor in laning phase. It's not just like Ori, where she has strong laning phase. It's like, as Victor, both your Q and E are, well, E is extremely hard to dodge because it's so fast, and Q is literally like a point and click shield. Like, I think while Victor has a lot to learn for the laning phase, it'll probably make it too easy. And I think that eventually you kind of get to a point where positioning is quite easy on Victor because you can just like drop your R and play on max range. So I would actually say Victor is like relatively low. And again, it's not because he's bad for learning. It's really just because I feel like champs like Ori and Syndra will test you so much harder while also just like, yeah, overall being like a better experience. It's not to say Victor is bad. Again, like very middle of the pack for me, but there are mages that are just a lot better. The nice thing is I think mages have so many options to them, whereas, you know, stuff like assassins, a lot of your champs are very unique and just very all over the place. But hey, at least you got Akali. Okay, moving on. So we did the Victor Vlad. Okay, so Vlad I think is... there are certain skills that are extremely good to learn on Vlad. Like if you want to learn about flanking, if you want to learn about like split pushing and like maximizing CS, Vlad is an exceptional champ for learning these things. But the problem is he's so maxed out in these areas, and I think he kind of misses a lot of the other areas. Like I don't think that Vlad has to care too much about like warding. I don't think Vlad really has a whole lot to do with roaming because a lot of the time you won't get priority. So I think that, I don't know, within his niche, there's a lot to learn. But the problem is his niche is so specific that I don't think it'll transfer to a lot of other champs. I'll probably put him in like the Vel'Koz, you know, Irelia tier of being like, he's great for a few skills, but overall not that transferable. Xerath? Where would I put Xerath on the list? I don't even know. I think he's definitely like harder and more rewarding than Lux. Like I think he doesn't have as much get out of jail free cards. Has the potential to punish the laning phase. Yeah, I'm not really sure where I would put Xerath, to be honest. I think that in terms of, okay, if he has his own class as artillery mages, then Xerath might be the best. Like if you want to play like Xerath, Lux, Vel'Koz, Varus, all that sort of stuff, Corki, then Xerath might be the best champ for starting with this. And that makes me want to put him high on the list. But I do think that he does miss a lot of other things that regular champs will do. Like, for example, while he is a mobile, he has self-peel and a ton of range. So it's like a lot of the time not that much of an issue. You can also itemize really crazily on this champ because most of the time you won't be on the same screen as anyone else. So I'm probably going to put him somewhere about here. I think he is missing a lot of stuff that makes... I guess, like, makes a champ a really good champ for improving. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you will get away with on this champ. But in terms of artillery mages, he might be the best one for learning. But again, I'm kind of comparing him to other control mages as well. We're getting pretty close to the end here. So Yasuo's going to be next. I just realized I missed Talon. I'll come back to Talon at the end. Okay, so we'll do Yasuo. Where would I put Yasuo on the list? Not very high in my mind. I think this champ is too difficult and too niche. And I don't think he really teaches you much about any other champ. Like... even Yone, I actually think, plays out pretty differently from Yasuo. Like, I think Yone might teach you some things that help you with learning Yasuo. And I guess if you're good at Yasuo, you'll probably find Yone to be a lot easier. But I think outside of that, like, what champs really play like this? Like, even, you know, other bruisers or other, you know, other fighters play so differently. So I've had Yasuo, like, very low on the list. I don't think that he's even that representative of melee versus range laning. Like, I think Yasuo is one of the rare melee versus range laners that can actually push, but it's weird because he doesn't use his priority very well. So for me, Yasuo might be one of the worst champs for improving when it comes to transferring your skills to other things. Like, I don't think he's particularly good for learning League of Legends, and I don't think he transfers to many other champs. Now, Yone transfers a little better. So Yone is like, he will teach you a lot about melee versus range, and I think that does apply to most, you know, it plays the most melee versus range in the same way that it does for him. And I think it also is closer to playing like an assassin as opposed to just like a straight fighter. So Yone is actually going to be like a bit higher on the list for me. I think he's also like not super difficult to play. Like he has a skill cap, which is good, but he's not that hard either. I think he probably goes somewhere... I'll probably put him somewhere around here for me. Like, I think I'd still prefer... I think if you're trying to learn the game, you'd probably be better off starting with something like the Pantheon and... yeah, something like the Sylas I think might be good as well. But Yone can be a nice choice around that as well. I think that, you know, while he is harder, I guess, than a champ like Pantheon, you know, he also, yeah, which makes it worse. It also, like, I don't know, Pantheon will test more things, whereas like Yone might test the things that you are being tested on a bit deeper, maybe. Like I think melee versus range laning is a bit easier on Pantheon than Yon. So I don't know. That's just kind of my general thoughts of it. I think somewhere around there. Zed. Okay, so Zed is a weird one. Zed is definitely very weird. So I think Zed probably should be somewhere about here, maybe? Do we think about there? So, okay. Things with Zed is that I think like Zed has a relatively low skill floor while still having a high skill cap, so that's really good. I think that Zed will teach you a lot about like melee versus range laning. I do think you get away with it a bit easier on Zed because you don't have a resource, you know, you're like, or you have energy, but it regens pretty quick, and also you have like a very low cooldown on Q, which is your farming ability. So most other melee assassins have to trade HP or have to like trade a cooldown to like walk up, buy space for themselves, and then CS with the auto. Like you can imagine Akali walking up, threatening with Q, threatening with W, and then autoing the creep. Whereas Zed, you can kind of sit back and AFK farm, and you do scale very, very well. So that's like a playstyle you can get away with a bit more these days. I think Zed still, though, will probably teach you quite a lot about being an assassin overall. Like, I think team fighting and side laning on Zed especially will teach you quite a lot. I think I'll put him right next to LeBlanc, where it is quite a good champ for learning. You might find that it's easier to start with something else, or better in the long run to go with something else. But I think Zed, as far as assassins go, is definitely one of the better ones. And if you get good at something like Zed, it could be quite good to then start to look to transfer your skills to something else. Ziggs, okay, so Ziggs I think is really weird. Like Ziggs has a very strange niche. Like Ziggs is a snowballing artillery mage, which is, there aren't many champs like that. I think Lux is like the closest, but even she like has way more safety and a lot of other, I don't know, weird choices, I guess. So Ziggs, where would I put it? For me, I think Ziggs is like very, even though he's an artillery mage, for me, he is just his own champ. Like he can play aggressive in the same way that Xerath can, but he has like a very different style of team fighting. Like he mostly just drops all on people that are already CC'd. He doesn't really look to side lane, like he just wants to AFK mid. He can snowball really hard, but it's not really like up to you. Like you're kind of relying on your jungler to get herald and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't really like Ziggs for improving, and this might just be like a personal thing. But for me, I just can't like imagine there being a bunch of things that you learn on Ziggs that you couldn't learn in a different champ. So I think for me, I'm actually going to put him like pretty low. I think I'll end up putting him like right next to Lux, or like maybe lower. I don't know, maybe a tiny bit higher. Like I do think it would get punished a bit harder for like having less safety, but I don't know. I don't know what you can learn on Ziggs that you can't learn much easier on a different champ. Zillion should... Zillion's another weird one. Okay, so Zillion's a champ I used to play a lot of, actually, in I think Season 6, or maybe it was Season 7. I played a lot of Zillion top, which I know is real weird. Like, you guys probably don't think of me as a Zillion player at all, but back in the day, I did used to play it quite a bit. And the thing is, I think, again, Zillion, if this is a champ you start with, you're probably not going to be anywhere near aggressive as you should be, and you can very easily just fall into like peeling, you know, like even if you're not using your Qs well, you might just end up like pressing E and pressing Alt on someone. And I don't think Zillion's skills are very transferable to other champs. Like there aren't really any other champs that play like Zillion. You know, like Karma doesn't even really play like Zillion. I would say like Zillion's pretty low. He doesn't have much to do in the laning phase, and I think he's just like too niche. And most of the like control mage things don't really apply to him. So for me, it'd be pretty low. Zoe. What do I think about Zoe? So I think Zoe should actually be... She should be high, but not too high. I think she's like Azir for me. So Zoe is... She is another kind of midpoint between like the mage and assassin, similar to LeBlanc. But Zoe is really, really hard in the same way that LeBlanc is. But I also think there are things that Zoe can kind of cheese that LeBlanc can't. Like it's somewhat common for a Zoe to, even if she falls behind in lane, to just pick up random kills, whereas I don't think that's really the case for LeBlanc. You will get punished for immobility on this champ, but compared to some of the other immobiles, like you have more tools with dealing with it, all the movement speed and all the summoners you can get. So yeah, I think similar to Azir, she's a champ that can teach you a lot, but she's very difficult, and other champs can still teach you more. Getting towards the very end here, so K'Sante, should I put K'Sante on the list? I suppose I should. So K'Sante is a difficult to play tank, but he will actually teach you quite a lot about tanks. But I think that, I don't know, if I were you, if I were like coming to mid lane and I wanted to learn a tank, like I wouldn't start with K'Sante. Like I would start with something like Galio Pantheon and then like maybe move to this later on. But he can teach you quite a lot. I think I'll put him in here, and I think it's more like a top lane thing, you know, because there aren't many just like pure tanks like this in mid. but there are a lot more than top. So you might find that if you learn K'Sante mid, you can easily swap to top, which could be good. And I guess our last one before I go back and check, I know there's the talent, is to do Nefiri. So Nefiri should be pretty high on the list, I think. Nefiri is an AD assassin that can farm from range. She's relatively easy to play while also still kind of maintaining the fundamentals of being an AD assassin. I think I'd have her kind of like similar to Ekko, where like she is a champ that is a good entry point into the assassin kind of genre without being too difficult to play. And I really like Nefiri. I think it's a really cool design of a champ. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts. I don't really think there's anything I need to say about this champ that hasn't already been said. I still think there are assassins that'll test you harder. You know, like I definitely think you'll be punished. Like if you're bad at laning on Nefiri, you can kind of get away with it by farming with Q eventually. If you're bad at laning on Akali, you're going to feel it. You're going to have to get better at laning real quick. So, okay, there's the talent. Is there any else that really needs to be on here? I don't want to put like random stuff like Diana or Brand, mainly because like it should be pretty easy for you guys to figure out, you know, like how they kind of play. I could put Lulu. I think Lulu is already so similar to like Karma and my thoughts on her. So I don't think it really needs to be on there. Morgana. No, I don't think Morgana's a mid laner. Any of these? Not really. I mean, okay, there's arguments for maybe like Renekton and Rumble. I might put them on here just for like completionist sake. So Renekton is actually a pretty good champ for learning about like being melee versus ranged and for learning how to play like the tankier playstyle. The problem is I think it's a bit too easy compared to a champ like Galio where for the most part Renekton just wins trades. Now, it's not so much against range. Like where would I put him? I think I'd probably put him with Yon maybe a bit higher. Something like here can be quite good for learning. But I think you might find like if you one-trick Renekton and then you go to a champ that's like a bit weaker in lane, that you're gonna have, you know, you're gonna have a bit of a shock to the system. So yeah, I maybe put him about there. What else did I just say? Rumble. Rumble, yeah, okay, actually Rumble should be on the list. So Rumble's another good midpoint champ where like he's halfway between being like melee and range because he can farm with E. You know, he has some kind of like range components, but he's also like still a melee champ. You might find if you play like a control mage or something and you want to learn how to play melees, that Rumble is a good champ to go in between. Where would I put him though? He does have like a very unique heat play style, and I don't think he's amazing for learning the fundamentals. I think I'd probably put him like down here. Oh god, that makes the tier look ugly. I guess we're gonna do it. No, I can't do it. Okay, very bottom of B tier for me. Actually, no. Oh, do I really think that? Maybe it should be a tiny bit higher. Like, yeah, maybe about here. Honestly, I'm just going to put him right next to Renekton, I think. Like, it's just the same thing for me. They're good, like, champs for learning a little bit about it, but I don't think they really test you super hard, and you do have, like, some extra safety. Like, for example, Rumble doesn't have, like, a mana resource. He has a lot of extra sustain with his W that he can use to mitigate damage. He can go D-shield second win, so you can get away with a lot of shit on Rumble that you can't on other champs, and I think that knocks him down a bit for me. Then other than that, I think it's just Talon, right? I think it's just Talon. Just trying to check if there are any other champs. I don't think so. So I'm going to do Talon. So where would I put Talon? Okay, so Talon, I think shouldn't be too high. He's like very similar to these champs for me, where I think he's like kind of he's like a cheese. He's not a cheeser. No, he's not as cheesy as a champ like Qiyana. He should be a bit higher. Yeah, he's like similar to Fizz for me. Maybe you'd make it into B tier. Would you make it into B tier? Probably, yeah. I think so. So Talon is one of the few assassins that has the ability to farm and has the ability to side lane, so you'll learn a lot about that. And I think also, like, Talon does have a lot to learn in the laning phase about, like, really trying to find those windows to all in and snowball. There's a lot about priority usage, so there are actually quite a lot of good things about Talon. The thing that makes me, like, drop points for Talon is that he is very easy, again, to, like, suck at Talon and just pick up a bunch of random kills and then start one-shotting people out of nowhere. And I don't think that's, like, good gameplay, but it's still going to happen to you sometimes. I think I'll probably put him, like, somewhere about here. No, actually, I think I'll put him, like, here. Yeah, I think he's pretty decent for learning as an assassin, but I would probably prefer to learn the game with something else. But the good thing about him is that he is like easier to pick up than a champ like Akali. Like, again, Akali's pretty difficult to pick up, and while Akali will test those fundamentals really hard, like Talon will test them too, not as hard, but also like a bit easier to pick up. So I think that's going to be everything for this video. So again, I guess like before I might move some things around in a moment, but again, just to reiterate, the things I was mainly focusing on is I was trying to get a combination of one, like how good is this champ for learning League of Legends, and two, how good is this champ for learning other champions within its class. So even though a champion like Akali might not actually be as good as like for learning League of Legends as a champ like Galio, the thing is Akali is by far the best assassin for learning, if that makes sense. That kind of she has to be put high on the list for that. And maybe I should have split this into tier list by class. Maybe that's something I will do in the future. I mean, let me know, I guess, what you guys think of what I've done so far. Do I quickly need to move anything else around? Honestly, I don't think so. I think I've made my thoughts pretty clear on it. I mean, I could move things within tiers, but ultimately, like, I think I've done a fairly good job. If there were some things to move around, I might put more things in S tier, but I really do think Orianna stands alone in there. But really, I think you could move a lot around just, again, depending on what you value. Like, if you really think that like you're not caring too much about just like learning other champs, and what you want is just a simple champ to learn the fundamentals of the game from, then there are a lot of champs like Malz that should probably be much higher. Like, again, if you just care about learning the game, you don't care about learning other champs, then Malz should probably be A tier, you know? So I don't know, it's subjective at the end of the day. This is my opinion on it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm sure there'll be lots of comments about some of the champs I've put around, but that's what I think. So don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.